All right. Hi there. I am back. And to avoid further stress, if you felt it in my last episode, you felt correctly. To avoid that again, I will slow down my publishing. So, yes, I'm back, but I'm not going up to that speed again. It just kind of happened with authors returning to my emails after a while and then saying yes to a date I suggested several weeks ago, and it just happened that way that I sent out so many interviews in a short while. So I'm gonna slow down, and I have been slowing down, at least my breathing. I did have a very eventful summer. How about you? The astrology was pretty insane as well, and we had that beautiful, and we still have that beautiful conjunction between Saturn and Neptune. So there's been a lot going on, and there still is. And I'm just going to allow myself to return here to tap less frequently and, unpredictably in a way. Well, you can predict that it's me, and sometimes I'm even going to have a guest with me. But apart from that, who knows? But I am happy to be with you, and as you know, I try to cover a wide range of topics, mostly about the workings of the universe as a way to heal the human condition, therapeutic astrology. I mean, and how even that, what we refer to as modern therapy, how it's based on ancient mystic visions, concepts of transformation and different states that we can be in. So I had my astrological training first, and then I turned to trauma therapy. And when I did that, I was really surprised to find just how much was taught in the therapeutic school that had, absolutely fit into esoteric frames as well, into the mystical tradition. And the funny thing was that it was coming from the teachers who denounced any thread of mysticism. Okay, so for them, it was not about spirituality at all. I mean, we can agree that healing is about somewhat uniting body, mind, and spirit, okay? But then for a lot of people in therapy, it's like, as long as we don't dwell too much on the spirit part, right? At least don't take it any further than referring to one's inner self. A lot of people do that in therapy. And meditation, that is also highly valued in therapy as well. But here on this podcast, I want to stay open. Because I'm not just here to tell you what I know. I'm here to discover it with you. So I can easily have guests here who are not into astrology actually, but then have some other expertise that I really want to hear about. I want to learn. And I believe that we should hold different practices, explanations, insights, understandings, frameworks, however you want to see it, hold it together so that we can clarify for ourselves what we want to think about a certain topic, so that we are not sheep, but that we become inspired to think each for ourselves independently. So this podcast is about embodied spirituality for one, but it's even more than that. It's not just about this interface between spirit and matter, because I do feel that has grown into the mainstream by now. What I'm here to present is also even more alternative ways of viewing the world. I'm talking about how the unseen practices of the past can heal us, and how that it aligns perfectly with what I find and have found in modern therapy, psychotherapy. Unless, of course, we come from a very prejudiced place, if we stay open. I mean, in spirituality, we also talk about the need for purity, cleansing yourself. And I believe that therapy is the modern highway to exactly that, to gain purity, meaning doing shadow work, really, doing that inner work that we always talk about. It's so important to work with yourself. Well, that is therapy. And that that is a way to guide your consciousness to align with the soul. So I feel these practices absolutely align. And even if we don't feel that, even if we say, okay, it's opposites, then what is opposites is a pair, right? So that's how we view it in astrology. That's how you view it in Hermeticism, in life, meaning that's therapy. That's what therapy is about. How opposites can actually be reconciled and be viewed of as one axis. So whatever opposition is there in your chart or in what you come to present with your therapist can be invited in and can be contained in your awareness. And usually that's, at least one way to do it is that you realize that it is two ends of the same scale, such as love and hate. Wherever you find one, you'll find the other. It's the same scale, it's just different degrees of it. There's so many layers to any information that we pull up in the therapeutic chair. And once we see that both of these polarities are wanting to help our system, then it becomes a lot easier to manage. And I mean, in our earliest history, the practice of medicine, or what we now link to psychiatry and psychology that there wasn't really a name for in that way before, that was associated with a priestly function. Whereas now it's all based on science. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing in and of itself. That's probably great for a lot of issues. For example, to not misuse your spirituality. That you could find yourself in a very rigid religion if you wanted to be healthy. I mean, so I definitely see how it has been helpful, but today it's not that great. It's not that great to only base it on science, because what about trauma? What about loss of purpose? To heal something like that, some pain to the soul, or even just to deal with it. Maybe you're not exactly healing it, but just to start engaging with it. I think that we need a metaphysical quality, meaning insights into the ultimate nature of existence. At least that's how I feel, and that's why I started this podcast, because I do have a huge appetite for the supernatural and for exploring consciousness, so that I may live more of my potential. And it comes out as this urge to reconcile my mortal existence with something greater than that, just question mark, what is that? But greater than the material. It's that yearning for inner and outer harmony. And that desire, I believe, has echoed through the ages, and we have found so many ways of dealing with it. And I want to hear all about it. And I think it's really important for astrologers to be able to go deeper into the therapeutic field, and vice versa. It's really in both camps. For example, on therapy training a few years ago, I heard this perspective that I hadn't heard before, which I find to be apparently quite accepted in psychotherapeutic realms. It is when a client feels a profound sense of meaninglessness. If presented to the therapist, then that meaninglessness will become contagious to the therapist. And I know we can say that about a lot of emotions, but it sounded like this is it kind of evokes a deep existential dread that just resonates on a very deep level. And the reason I took note of that phenomena is, of course, because I felt a lot of meaninglessness in my life. I have a lot of Sagittarius, and that's a search for meaning. It's not necessarily that you just have that feeling of meaningfulness from the beginning, right? So in the past, that spiral, that downward spiral, is what led me into all that suicide attempts that I've spoken about before. And so now that I heard on this therapy training that clients coming with meaninglessness, it kind of sounded like you don't want to be with them. That is really heavy stuff. Of course, I felt really sad because I knew that I had been doing that. And if I were to take a problem and practice with another therapist, I would also talk about meaninglessness, because that was just at the top of my mind in those years. But so after I heard that, I read up on it, and I can see, I think it must come from Irvin Yalom. I'm not sure. Let me know if you know, if it comes from some other place. But Yalom is the existentialist psychotherapist who's like done an amazing job of many things and his books. And so he writes about, on the one hand, he says, if life has no meaning, the very fabric of our existence unravels. But he is an existentialist, so there is no inherent meaning, right? But it's just that if you don't have a sense of it. And so that's, it becomes a question of if the individual has a sense of purpose, meaning to their lives, if they can sense that. And he talks about how empathetic resonance when sitting with a client's despair can stir the therapist's own anxiety about life's meaning, mortality, and freedom. So maybe this is where it comes from. Again, please let me know if there are other references, because of course I asked and I could not get a reference when I asked about it. And it made me so sad. And of course I'm not opposing a great therapist like that, but I can't find that he exactly is saying that, that is such a low vibe that you don't really want to be around when the client has that. And I'm not sure they didn't exactly say that, but that is what they implied. They implied that is like the worst case. You can really be dragged down into the mud when a client presents their own meaninglessness. Okay. So that is the part I want to disagree on, because here on tap, of course, I say that there is inherent meaning in the universe. It's intelligible. There is an intelligence in everything that does now and will in the future exist. And I'm pretty sure that all that I'm saying is just going to be common sense. Maybe not all that I'm saying. I have a personality, I have blind spots, but my main points here, I'm sure it's going to be common knowledge, because it is embedded in the Aquarius age that we have begun, that we are becoming our own gods. I know that sounds a bit like, okay, so that's more science, is it? Well, it's not pure science. That's only in the less developed stages. It's really about a greater dissemination of the occult knowledge, the Aquarius awareness, the Aquarius light to the Plutonian occultism darkness. And what does that mean? Well, when you are an occultist, you know that there are initiations. So what I'm gathering is not that there is any destructive flow of meaninglessness from a client. To me, that is bullshit. For me, and it's even really painful. To me, I find a meaninglessness, that there's just one place to go with meaninglessness. That is to seek meaning. Okay? And when you seek meaning, you seek wisdom. What can be better than that? Seeking wisdom, seeking personal, spiritual transformation. So the lack of meaning, or the sense of meaning, that is in fact an initiation. Okay? That in itself is an initiation. And so of course you do not go through it very well if you go down and the rabbit hole of suicidal ideation, but it's overcoming all of that darkness. Can you see how important this is, that modern therapy is not just left to its own demise? I mean, it can become very reductionistic when we have greater questions to life. I mean, but modern therapy is then brilliant, mostly. At least what I call trauma therapy is brilliant in connecting us to emotional truth that then lead to that transformation. So how do we go through that initiation? Well, I think therapy is the way. But a lot of therapists just do not know that it's actually a spiritual path. You can call it a spiritual path. You can call it inner development or transformation. Yeah, so I really vouch for both. But of course, it keeps being a little bit double here, paradoxical as I speak about it. Because if then the therapist herself is rejecting that cosmic forces are shaping our existence, and that there are these hidden laws of the universe, well, I don't know. What is the client to do if you can't even have that spiritual conversation? The whole point is to integrate. Not just integrate the intellectual, but everyday practical growth. Because I think that is something that is quite mainstream these days. That's very good, that it's not something that you just know, you also need to live it out. But I'm a step ahead of that. I'm claiming that astrology needs therapy and vice versa for the emotional and karmic resolve, that they need to go hand in hand. I mean, if you are an astrologer, you will know that look in your client's face when they ask you, but how do I do that? Right? And they say that responding to something you just advised them to do. And there's nothing you can say that will help, because in order to answer that question, how do I do that? How do I live up to this potential? Or maybe actually as an astrologer, sometimes we can feel, well, I actually just told you what to do. I actually just told you what to do. And then the client will ask, but how do I do that? Right? Because it's more complicated than a simple advice. You cannot tell a person what to do. People have to undergo their own gradual alchemical process. And what I'm saying here is just that in this day and age, your best odds are doing that while in therapy. So yes, I still feel like there is some purpose to tap to this podcast. But again, I'm not gonna overstep my own boundaries again. I'm not gonna use resources I don't have. So I'm gonna let it flow a bit more. And you'll just hear from me when I feel inspired, or when I have a guest. I'll just publish, and maybe, it's going to be a while, or maybe it's going to be soon. Who knows? So please just subscribe, keep following along, and we'll see what happens. I'd love to hear from you, especially if you are in this field of either therapy and astrology and are trying to merge the two. I'd love to have a conversation with you here on the podcast, because even though I'm saying I want to open it up and I want to learn from all of these voices, this is of course something that I'm in particularly interested in. Yeah, but with that said, I am really open, because I find that to be my path is definitely the spiritual path, and I need the openness, because every time I think I got it, there's more. So I need the openness, and for me to stay open, I need to listen to other people. So actually, I should take that back. I don't know who exactly I'm looking for. I am staying open. How about you? I hope you're doing well out there. And remember, you have a place to call whole.